Hi, I'm Max Sheldon. This is John Henry Souza with me today, and we're in the PantoRouter shop, and this is for the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers. And if you're not in the Guild, we encourage you to go and have a look at the Guild of Oregon Woodworkers. Over 1,000 members, a wonderful shop, including a PantoRouter, and lots of classes and whatnot. Both that you can attend live and online. So today we're going to show some of the features and benefits, some of the operations of the PantoRouter. The PantoRouter, I will say, is a little bit biased, but it is absolutely by far the best Mortise and Tenon jig machine on the market today. We can do anywhere from 1 inch to 6 1/4 inches in 1/4 inch increments, from 1/8 inch, 1/4 inch, 5/16, 3/8, 1/2 inch, 3/4, and 1 inch Mortise and Tenon right out of the box. All the templates are included. In addition to that, we do box joints, segmented box joints, and we'll show you the reason that that's kind of cool, and segmented or variably spaced dovetails as well. So the angles are a piece of cake, and compound angles are even very easy with the PantoRouter. So we'll show you how we do all those. But as I said, the bread and butter of the PantoRouter is Mortise and Tenon. So what we'd like to do is to do a Mortise and Tenon for you real quick to show you how easily it gets set up. We'll walk you through the steps, and the whole thing we can go from setup to glue up in just a matter of minutes. These are the standard Mortise and Tenon templates that we have, and they are 1 inch, 1.5 inch, 2, 2.5, and 3 inch horizontal, and then we have 2 that are vertical. But rather than use one of these standard ones today, we're going to use our segmented Mortise and Tenon setup, and that allows us to combine these end pieces with the center pieces to make all of the different sizes of Mortise and Tenon. Now, one of the cool things about the Mortise and Tenon on the PantoRouter is that we have these little steps in the end of the mortise slot. And by the way, the mortise and the tenon are cut using the same template. We run our guide bearing through the center slot to do the mortise, and then without any additional setup, we just change the bit and the guide bearing, and we go around the outside to make the tenon. And you'll notice that the tenon, the outside is tapered. That allows us to move the guide bearing down the taper in order to perfect the fit. You can get a fit that you have to hammer together if that's what you want, or one that has plenty of room for glue or whatever, wherever in between you want that. In addition, we have a little step in the end that allows you to make the mortise wider or narrower. And sometimes we want a through Mortise and Tenon. You want it exactly the same size, no room at all. If you want a little bit of wiggle room for the glue up process, then we use the second step. And if you want a little more, or maybe you want to wedge it, we use the third step. And all this is just a matter of moving the guide bearing just a fraction of an inch. So we're going to, what's the dimension of our stock?
Yeah, so we're going to simulate a table apron going into a leg. So we have 1 3/4 stock for our leg, and 3 inch wide by about 3/4 thick stock for the apron. So we're going to do a 2 1/4 inch Mortise and Tenon to join these two pieces, being both flush on the top and centered both in the apron and in the leg. Okay. So we'll set that up. So as Mac was saying, we can do all kinds of different size Mortise and Tenon from 1 inch to about 6 1/4, depending on what combination of templates we're using on our template holder. To do a 2 1/4 inch Mortise and Tenon template, the templates we'll use is a 1-inch centerpiece and our 2 triangle end pieces. These end pieces on their own make up a 1 1/4 Mortise and Tenon, and by adding a 1-inch template spacer, we get 2 1/4. So we'll load that on the template holder and get ourselves set up. Now, centering our template on the template holder is very easy. The entire machine works off of a center line. We have a center line on our template holder that has corresponding holes in them. We also have a center line on our table, which is aligned with our template holder center line. So what we'll do first is center our template on the template holder by utilizing the back of our guide bearing and placing that in the centering hole of both the template and template holder behind it. And we'll tighten that down. So all we'll do is butt our 2 end pieces to the center portion of the template. And now I know that 2 1/4 inch template is perfectly centered on our template holder. We have our workpiece here. It is 3 inches wide, and we have a centering scale fence on the back, and as you can see, the fence has a full inch scale on the back portion of it and a 1/2 inch scale on the front. So we can place our workpiece on our full inch scale and measure it and say, okay, that is 3 inches wide, and we can line up our 3 with the center line on the table and lock it in place. When you need a high level of precision, I always like to double check that by just drawing a center line on our workpiece and seeing if that aligns with our table line here. And to double check it, you can always flip and see that it lines up in both directions, which it does. So now I know we're centered horizontally within the width of our workpiece here, but we want to also be centered in the thickness of our workpiece. So to do that, all we're going to do is place our workpiece on our thickness gauge and drop the template holder down on top. So by placing our workpiece on our thickness gauge, we can drop that template holder down and we can lock that in place. And without doing any sort of measuring or marking, I know that this router bit will now cut a tenon in the end of this perfectly centered. However, we are going to cut our mortise first, which is in a thicker workpiece. So we're going to do our leg in the thickness gauge, lock that down. Now we're good to go. These front fence stops just help align our workpiece to the front of our table and keep it parallel. And since we want both of these pieces to line up on the top face, we're going to utilize the same fence location for both our mortise piece and tenon, and they'll align perfectly when it's assembled. So we'll slide our workpiece against our fence and clamp it down. Now, since our leg is pretty long here, we can't slide another clamp in line with this first one, but we do have a scrap piece of our leg glued onto a scrap piece of plywood, and that'll allow us to get a second clamp on there. So our workpiece is secured to the table. As Mac mentioned before, We utilize the inside of the template for our mortise and the outside for the tenon. So we'll do the mortise first. And we're going to utilize that center step of the interior of the template, which gives us that little bit of lateral movement when we go to assemble this, and it won't create a vacuum when there is glue in there. So once our guide bearing is set, our last step is to set the depth of our cut. And we can pull our brush off to show this a little bit easier. So to set our depth, our first step is to bump our router bit to our workpiece. Once we've done that, we have a depth gauge on the bottom here, and we're going to do a 1-inch mortise and tenon. So I'm going to set my mortise depth a touch over an inch to make sure that our tenon doesn't bottom out before the shoulders contact our leg. And now we're ready to cut our mortise. Snap our brush on. Good to go. So as you can see, in a matter of seconds, we've cut a really nice 2 1/4 inch long mortise and tenon, and we can pull this off now. So to cut our corresponding tenon, first we're going to center our workpiece again because our thickness is changing. We can slide our front fence stop out of the way. We're no longer going to utilize that. And I'm going to clamp my workpiece to the table. Slide one back here. And it doesn't matter how much I'm overhanging as long as it's longer than the length of our tenon. So we're doing a 1-inch tenon. I can visually see that I'm overhanging more than an inch. So I'll clamp that in place, securing it against the fence. Now we could cut our tenon with this 3/8 bit, however we found that the quality of cut is a little bit nicer when we use a 1/2 inch bit for our tenons. So we're going to change our bit out really quick. First we're going to unplug our router here, and you can see that on the patented dust collection hood, our brush snaps on and off really easily. We can lock this in place, make our lives a little bit easier. And we have a hinge which allows us to easily access the collet of the router. The Bosch router requires 2 wrenches to do a bit change. So we'll take our 3/8 out. We'll put in our 1/2 inch bit, and this is a Spectra coated bit that comes standard with our new all-in packs from Amana. Snap our brush back on, and it's good to go. So same as before, all we're going to do is bump our bit to the workpiece, set our depth of cut, which is 1 inch, and now we're going to use the outside of our template rather than the inside to cut the tenon. Now we're doing a 3/8 inch thick mortise and tenon. To do that with a 1/2 inch bit, we're going to use a larger guide bearing, which is 15 millimeters. And we're going to start highest on our template there's a taper to the template which allows us to fine-tune the fit of our mortise and tenon. And we're going to start with our guide bearing high up on that taper and then slide it down a little bit at a time and sneak up on a perfect fitting mortise and tenon. So we'll lock that down. Now before we unclamp it, we can just bring our workpiece in here and test our fit. And as you can see, that's definitely too tight. I'm sure with the sledgehammer you could probably get that to go, but it's not the fit we're looking for. So all we're going to do is slide our guide bearing down this template a little bit.
Just a second, John Henry, let me get up. Okay.
And now we'll take another pass around the tenon, and it should be a really nice fit. There are some indication lines on the top of our templates which give a little bit of a reference. My first adjustment was just down to our first line, and now I'm going to move it a little bit past that line. It's kind of a guess and check situation where, depending on your species of wood, humidity, and how tight you really want that, you do find a little bit of variation. So I always like to just really take my time and sneak up on it. And then once it is the fit I like, I can cut all of my tenons and I know they're going to be exactly the same. So with that small adjustment, we can take another pass here. And that's looking really good. So we can see that we're really nice and flush on the top there. Really nice strong joint, and centered within both of our workpieces here. So from this point, we're going to move on to compound angle mortise and tenon, which will add a little bit of complexity to the pieces you're working on, and allow you to do those cuts really nice and repeatably.
So the holy grail for a lot of us woodworkers, especially novice woodworkers like myself, is the crest rail on a chair. It's difficult because it's a compound angle. The joint is angled in this direction and it's tilted in or twisted in. So to make that is really difficult on other types of jigs. You know, there's ways to stand this piece up on a table saw and try and make your cuts, but nothing is as safe, as easy, as fast and repeatable as doing it on the PantoRouter. So what we're going to show you today is how we can set this up. First, how we design it, then how you set it up, and how we can make a double mortise and tenon in just a few minutes each after we've got it set up. So we'll show you that joint. Now, John Henry demonstrated how easy it is to find the thickness and the center of a workpiece, but that's ultimately not what we want. Ultimately what we want is the center of our finished piece. And in order to find that, we design whatever shape we like, draw our fair curves, and then find the center of that eventual workpiece, the finished piece, carry it around, and find the center of it up and down. It's not the total here. It's only up to the top of our crest rail. So once we find that center point, then we have a reference place to work from. And of course, as we demonstrated, we just put our workpiece on the table with the end extended beyond where the tenon cut would go, so it doesn't hit the table. But in this case, we're also going to skew it, and then we're going to tilt it. And John Henry will show you how we use that reference point and set this all up for that perfectly repeatable cut.
So for this operation, we have removed our centering scale fence, which we utilized in the first mortise and tenon that we cut. And we're going to use our auxiliary fence, which has these elongated slots, allows our mounts to the table to slide within it, and that can let us affix that to the table at whatever angle we desire. So to set that up, we have cut our two ends of our workpiece at the angles that we want. In this case, we're doing 5.5 degrees. These jigs are really helpful because they allow you to set up for both sides of our chair, which in a sense are mirror images of each other when they're set up on the table because the angles are opposites. So we've made a little jig that is 5.5 degrees. It's got a shoulder on both ends. You could definitely use a bevel gauge you have around, but we found it's really handy to just have this on hand for angles you use often. So first thing we're going to do is tilt our table to that 5.5 degrees that we like. And we have a digital angle finder. This one is a Wixie. And we can just very gently clamp that to our table, hold it in place. We're going to zero it. And now we can tilt our table to that 5.5. We'll lock that side. So now we'll slide our auxiliary fence on. And for right now, we're just going to leave this loose and off to the side. And in order to set up our double mortise and tenon, all we would do is swap out our template. That's a single for two individuals that are smaller. And we've put our pointer in the router, which comes with our machine. And that allows us to take our workpiece here, and by loosening the template holder, we can align our pointer with the center lines that we've laid out that Mac described just a moment ago. So I'm going to lock our pantograph carriage in place so that it can't slide forwards or backwards. And now the only movement I have is up and down on our template holder. So I can take my workpiece and bring it to the pointer, and I'm just going to align the pointer with the crosshairs that we have drawn on there and lock it in place. So now this whole workpiece can pivot on our center line that we've drawn on. And now with our jig that we made, we can over. And we'll just clamp that down lightly. Double check and make sure that's still aligned the way we like. That looks really good. So now I can take a second clamp. So at this point, with my workpiece aligned in 5.5 degrees off of 90, as well as tilted up 5.5 degrees, I can set my auxiliary fence to that location. By setting our auxiliary fence, I know that each crest rail that I need to cut will have the same angles cut on our tenons. So from this point forward, all we would do is cut our tenons the exact same way in which we cut the first mortise and tenon. And that's the setup for our compound angles and really what allows us to build some pretty complicated furniture and joints. Next, we're going to do some dovetails.